Once again, we gather in search of the truth, dark, and mystery. It's the Drunk Turkey Show.
Big development today in the investigation into the murders of 4 University of Idaho students. According to state and local officials and court documents, 28-year-old Bryan Kohberger has been arrested. He was arrested and arraigned this morning in Pennsylvania.
We have new details on what Bryan Kohberger was doing right before his arrest. Police says a tactical team burst in to arrest the Idaho murder suspect. He was in pajamas and latest gloves, stuffing trash into Ziploc bags.
Hey, greetings from the year 3000. It still sucks. This is Philip J. Pride, and you're listening to the Drunken Turkey Show. Your one stop for this sort of thing. Hit that button, like and subscribe. You know what to do, just like every other podcast.
Just like every other podcast, guys. You guys know what to do. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, ring that notification bell. Today we got a great show for you guys. We're going back into the Bryan Kohberger case. We're going to be talking about the Dateline episode, and we're also going to be talking about these upcoming these new docs that just got dropped. And we're going to be discussing all this with a special guest, former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer. Welcome back to the show. How's it going?
Thank you so much for having me. It's going great.
Well, yes, of course. And my pleasure for having you on. It was a great time that last time we spoke, and I anticipate it'll be another awesome time with you tonight. And so just to kind of get things going, let me pull up the new documents that just came out. Let's see here. I should have probably done this before, but here we are. So there's a notice of a hearing. This is going to be a sealed hearing, discussion regarding the roles of victims. This is going to be tomorrow at 10 a.m. local to Boise. What do you think this reference is? I know that at the very bottom of this document, Shannon Gray is listed on here, who is the Goncalves family attorneys. And I reached out to Steve, just for everybody to know, I reached out to Steve. There was some speculation going around saying that something about the non-dissemination order being violated and that Shannon Gray might be, questioned about something, I guess, because his name came up on this document. There's nothing to do with that. The Goncalves family aren't being looked at for any violation of non-dissemination order at all. In fact, Shannon Gray has been invited to this hearing in good graces. And so it's those rumors or those people trying to connect those dots, those are 100% false. But I'll hand it over to you, Jennifer. What do you think this hearing is referencing?
Well, recently, meaning today, another document dropped asking for a continuance of this trial. And this is going, if it is granted by the judge, it's going to have huge implications for the victims. I think the judge definitely wants to have a conversation with all the victims involved in this. And remember, that's a lot. We're talking about all the victim family members. And then we're also talking about Bethany Funke and Dylan Mortenson and even other victims, if you will, that were traumatized by this event. I think mainly it's going to focus on the families. I think it possibly could be related to the continuance and then also related to this trial as a whole and moving forward regarding the victims and their concerns.
And you're referencing this here motion to continue, the defendant's motion to continue is what you're referencing?
Yes.
And just for those that don't know, that's I guess to change the date of the starting period of the trial. Is that correct?
That's right. Whenever you file a motion for continuance, it's basically saying we want to postpone the trial. And I just shudder at why they're wanting this. I mean, I expected this, a long time ago. I said, I'll be shocked if it goes in 2025, 2026, maybe. I predicted probably 2027, but 2026, hopefully, just because there's a lot to go over. And honestly, I have to say, with the Dateline situation, I just wonder if that might be in part their reasoning for continuance.
Interesting. I think that I wouldn't be surprised if Ann Taylor and the defense team try to use the Dateline episode as a reasoning for this. Judge Hippler had he was pretty, had some strong emotions when he came to, or strong feelings and thoughts when he came to the Dateline. He's setting up a special prosecutor to go in there and try to figure out who leaked something. And so I think that there's a saying, you strike when the iron is hot. The iron is hot right now for the defense to argue this. I wouldn't be surprised if that's what their argument is. I hope it don't go through. I really do. But you bring up some valid points there as to why it might be a continuance.
Yeah, it would be very unusual, especially when you compare it to another similar type trial in terms of high profile, in terms of just heinousness, the murders of JJ and Tylee, the Vallow case. And that took years to get tried, years and years, I think 7. That was not a trial that I was intimately involved in until really probably the last year and a half or so. But it's very unusual for these trials not to be continued for years and years, especially when you have a death penalty case. And so for it to go in 2025 would have really surprised me. But we'll see. I mean, Judge Hippler is no nonsense, but anytime you throw new issues into the situation, like the Dateline, I just feel terrible for the victim families, first and foremost.
I do too. I'll be honest. I wasn't aware of this document being dropped. It just kind of dropped on me. So I'm a little bit deflated, I guess would be a good word. I really hope that's not the case. I'm hoping it's a continuum of something else, whether it be this upcoming hearing that is scheduled or something else. But that'll be unfortunate. But going back to tomorrow's hearing, the victim's role, what does this usually entail? Are they going to look at the victims who have passed in this scenario? Are they looking at the surviving victims and their role as to why they didn't call 911 in the 8 hours? Could this be a situation where they're looking at them as alternate perpetrators? I know that's been something that has been thrown around by the defense team. Is it that they're looking at Dylan and Bethany as potentially alternate perpetrators? What do you think this victim's role is?
Well, certainly Judge Hippler said in terms of the third-party culprit defense that he's got to have some pretty strong information before he's going to let that push forward. And that is very typical in all of these cases. You can't just throw possible murder suspects, just throw mud against the wall with nothing to substantiate it. I mean, it's such a defamation of character against anyone who would be blamed. I mean, we're seeing that full bore in the Karen Reed case. And I anticipate no matter what the outcome is, that you are going to see hefty, we've already seen one lawsuit filed. We are going to see hefty defamation lawsuits filed for all of those witnesses that there's not a shred of evidence yet. They've been named and blamed now for over 2 years, not to digress, but that is the type of situation any judge is going to want to avoid, and he's going to want to avoid that here. So I truly think this is an important hearing for him to hear from these victims. He's never heard from them, remember. And so I think it's going to be a very important hearing.
Yeah, I agree. It definitely will be an important hearing, and you make a lot of valid points there. Especially going to the Karen Reed trial. And I think that Judge Hippler might be watching or looking at that trial. One of the things that I noticed that he said that kind of bothered me in the Karen Reed trial is that every time there's a sidebar, every time there's an issue, it's the entire defense team, including the defendant, get up and go up to the stand. And that was one of the things he said, we're not going to have that happen in this case. That's not going to happen. There's not going to be a train of people coming up here whenever there's sidebars. And he wants to put a limit to the sidebars and those type of things so that it doesn't interrupt the flow of trial. And I think that's the way it should be done. And I like the way he's taken control of this of this trial or soon to be trial. What did you think? Did you think maybe perhaps he's taking or looking at some of these other high profile cases and seeing what he doesn't like and making sure it doesn't happen in his trial?
Well, possibly, but I think more than anything, Judge Hippler, he's been around. This is not his first rodeo, and he clearly understands the law. He's a no-nonsense guy. I love that he utilizes common sense. I've actually enjoyed his little quips and sense of humor. That always just shows me how bright somebody is when they're able to quip and come back in sort of a semi-humorous way. Obviously, there's nothing humorous about this case per se, but some of Ann Taylor's arguments are humorous, and he certainly makes light of them often. But he's taking control of his courtroom early. This is not going to be a show for him, and if it ever gets like that, I can guarantee you he's going to shut down the cameras and not stream, even though I think he's clearly, and he said this, Daniel, he wants transparency. He's warned both sides about that. He has put forth so much information in this case already that we've never known about because he's opening up a lot of the documents for us. He wants to stream, but he's not going to let it become a clown show like what's happened in Massachusetts.
Yeah, I definitely see that here. I definitely see him putting his foot down and showing his authority. One of the other things that I'm hoping this continuance is this, because the judge basically told him that the defense, that is, that they don't have any real evidence, and whatever they did present, there's a question about its admissibility. They wanted something pretty relatively quickly as far as their offer of proof. I'm hoping that's what this motion of continue would be. But in the end, if you are playing, I guess, devil's advocate, who would you expect the defense to point towards? Anybody specifically? Anybody like what do you think the alternate perpetrator is going to be?
I think it's going to be more than one, and I think they're going to try to run with the whole, purported drug house and some sort of either vendetta or gang style action that occurred, and it's so ridiculous. That's why it's so difficult for me to even talk about it, Daniel, because it's truly ridiculous. They're going to try to run with two, spots of blood on a banister in a party house where anybody who has a nick on their thumb or which I have right now, that's what made me think of it. It's obvious people handled that banister all the time. I mean, the amount of people that have been in and out of that house when they lived there, before they lived there, depending on the cleaning and all, Daniel, it could be anybody. That glove, again, was found well after the search by another YouTube creator, by the trash cans. I think that's irrelevant, but they're going to try to make hay out of that. And I think they're going to try to say this has something to do with drugs and the activities going on in that house. That's what I think.
Yeah, just to kind of, I guess, lay down the guidelines of the alternate perpetrator in Idaho, what needs to be placed there for this to fly. The evidence must make it more probable that someone else committed the crime, and it cannot be based on speculation or bare suspicion. Relevance and direct connection under Idaho Rule of Evidence 401 evidence must be relevant, meaning it has any tendency to make any fact more or less probable than it would be without the evidence. Additionally, court often require a direct connection between the alternative suspect and the crime, not merely motive or opportunity, which I think is huge right there. Because to me, I thought it was they were going to look at, for instance, maybe perhaps Jack Decor, because he's an ex-boyfriend. He was with the victims that night at the corner club. He was the one that was getting called. But the voicemails and text messages that were coming in from Kaylee were Kaylee wanting to get back with him. I've confirmed that. It was Kaylee wanting to get back with him. Kind of blows up the motive of Jack wanting to do something because she broke up with him and is leaving. You know what I'm saying? because it was the other way around. So I don't know. I don't know what else it could be. You know, you mentioned the blood. They would have to, wouldn't they have to bring up somebody specifically? Wouldn't they have to do the blood work to point at somebody then at that point?
Well, remember, they don't have any way to prove something like that. They can't have DNA testing. Well, they possibly could, which again could be part of the reason for their extension that they're asking for, Daniel. But essentially, I don't think they're going to go after Jack at all. I agree with you there. I don't think they're going to go after any particular named individuals that we know, other than I really do believe they're going to try to somehow weasel in Dylan Mortenson in some way, that she was, you know, whatever they want to say, the lookout or somehow culpable, you know, because of her actions, because she didn't call, because she, you know, said she experienced such fright, but yet we see text messaging. And it really, you know, Daniel, it really bothers me because she is such a victim. She's so lucky to be alive. If she opened that door wider, or if Bryan Kohberger wouldn't have made, if it's Bryan Kohberger, he's cloaked in the presumption of innocence, but if it's Bryan Kohberger, if he would have seen her and had a mind to go get her, he could have shoved open that door even with it locked and go after her. And she could be dead right now, and it'd be the Idaho 5. So it's just terrible when I hear this, but I think a lot of people want to rope her into this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's unfortunate, you know, and I also think that that's going to be the case as well. You know, one of the things that I'm glad that Hitler allowed was the 911 call, because in that 911 call, you really hear their fear. You can hear them trying to figure out what's going on. You can also hear them plainly say, hey, something happened and we don't know what. And so it's just a sad situation, you know, for them and how they've been dragged in the mud. And, you know, I think that the transparency or the lack thereof up until Hitler becoming the judge may have hurt them to a certain extent, because it allowed some of these rumors and some of these inaccuracies just run wild just because they're sensational or whatever the case may be. And I really feel horrible for them, and I hope they can recover and live a normal life. You know, I've seen so many people go out there and, like, I think there was a party that Dylan attended, and there was pictures of her, and people were bashing her just for attending a party years later after this. And I'm just like, what do you want her to do? You know, but
such a great point, because here we are, all of us, I think, mourning the fact that these kids will never be able to have a good time again, get married, you know, graduate, all the things that they missed out on. And yet some people are angry that Dylan and Bethany are getting to live a life. It's an oxymoron.
Yes, it definitely is. So the Dateline show came out, a lot of information. When it first aired and at the end of it, did you think, oh my gosh, there's going to be a problem here, this is too much information, or did that not cross your mind until it was brought up in trial?
Well, I'll tell you what, in the first Dateline, there was a lot of information that came out then too. Very significant information. The number one thing they said was Bryan Kohberger purchased the knife sheath from Amazon. And they said that almost 2 years ago now, or I can't remember that exact date that it came out. It's been a long time. Yeah. And a lot of other information. You know, they really dove into Papa Roger in that one. They dove into a lot of details about another crime that took place close by, and, you know, involving a girl and panties in the car, and just a lot of information. And, you know, I think
they talked about the Bryan tally too, and how some of the girls were having problems with Bryan Kohberger in the first one.
Yes. And the firing. I mean, there was a lot of detail, and the entirety of that episode, like this episode, said that their information was source driven. You know, it was from inside sources. And so when that sort of happened and nothing happened, I felt like the courts I have found are differing depending on which court it is, right? What state it is. Some courts believe this in the true sanctity of journalism, and that you develop a source that they're entitled to not being exposed. Massachusetts, we've seen this. You know, they are very much, they didn't make Gretchen Voss, who interviewed Karen Reed. They didn't make Gretchen Voss. They didn't allow her notes. You know, she's not testifying. So they believe in sort of that sanctity, right? The problem with this case, and the reason this judge is coming down hard, is there is a gag order. The end of the day, that gag order is more important than anything in terms of that journalistic relationship between a source. And I think Hippler is going to bring the thunder. And the reason I say that, he not only wants names, everybody who had that video, and that video is going to be the breadcrumb, meaning the new video of the surveillance in front of 1122 King. That video is going to be the key to figuring out who leaked the information. And he, as a prosecutor, Daniel, that means he wants them prosecuted. They're not going to get away with this with a slap. Look for obstruction or some sort of charge.
Well, you know, the one thing that I think, you know, when I look at what it was that Dateline said, I think that the pieces of information that probably are the most that can tie back to law enforcement for sure is going to be the selfies that he took, the information, you know, the pictures that Bryan Kohberger took, his search history. Those things obviously had to have come from an inside source. Now, the suspect vehicle one, you know, Linda Lane footage came out a while ago, and the owner of that footage didn't get anything. He's not part of the non-dissemination order. I would assume, this is just my assumption, I do not know. So I'm just going to put this out there. I don't know, but I would assume that Dateline was out there right away. I wouldn't be surprised if they got footage straight from the owners of the cameras, whether it be the owners of the 1112 or Linda Lane or whoever. And those folks aren't part of the non-dissemination order. And they were out there early on, perhaps getting information, because I think timing is important. Perhaps getting information before the non-dissemination order. I think they may have known a lot of the information they had when the first Dateline came out, but maybe perhaps just kind of held on to it for a little bit for whatever reason until now. What do you think about that? Does the timing in which the information came in and the source of which the information came in, could that be something that ends up being a nothing?
Well, I don't think it's going to be a nothing. I think that there is likely a source, because I agree with you. There's too much that would only be known to law enforcement or a prosecution team. But this is an interesting thought, of course. You know, FBI agents aren't allowed to talk about their ongoing cases with their spouses or with anyone for that matter. Period. End of story. That's the rule. Mm-hmm. But local departments don't necessarily have that tight of restriction. And so what if this was coming really third hand, second hand, third hand, fourth hand, whatever it might have been? I think that is very interesting because, you know, that gag order, it's really, it would still apply, but I think it's going to be harder to peg them if that's the scenario.
Yeah. The only thing that doesn't bother me, the only thing that I can say is the screenshots, or not the screenshots, but the selfies that Bryan Kohberger took. Those were taken off his phone. I mean, there's nowhere ands, ifs, or buts about it, unless there's just, you know, unless he posted them somewhere, Bryan Kohberger, that is, and it was you know, taken off of that public site. I think you have a hard time explaining that one. You know what I mean?
I couldn't agree more with you. As I said, I think even the video, which you bring up a good point, could they have gotten it straight from the source? You know, this is the thing. Judge Hippler knows what the evidence is, right? He knows some of that, and he knows that that information presented by Dateline was good stuff, and he wants to get down to it. And I think he thinks that he can figure out who did it. If there is just one or two, or how it was disseminated. And I say that because to literally appoint a special prosecutor, that's the reason. When I saw that, I thought, oh gosh, this is not going to end well.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. The special prosecutor and he even went in there that could grant immunity and a bunch of other things. I was like, dang, he wants to find out what happened, and he wants to know. I mean, he's setting an example. You know, he's been tough and fair on both sides, in my opinion. And you know, I really like this judge. And you know, if somebody's leaking things out that they shouldn't, then you know, they shouldn't have done it.
You know, I have such, you know, first of all, law enforcement leaking anything like this is just, you know, I have some thoughts on that. But if a local law enforcement officer was speaking with their wife, spouse, brother, sister, parents, whatever it was, still within the dissemination issue, right? And then that person leaked it. I have a little bit, I have a lot less issue with that. I don't know what you think about that. What do you think about that? Do you think that, no, I mean, in the FBI, we could never talk about anything. It's been so interesting now, you know, when I got into media, to be able to even talk. I remember at first I would get interviewed and I would be so generic, and they'd say, well, what do you mean by that? Because I still have that hat on that. Yeah. And even now I'm very careful about FBI secrets, you know, not to talk about those. But you know, when you're ordered not to disseminate, you just can't do it.
No, I don't think you're not supposed to, obviously. Even when I was in law enforcement, you know, don't remember anybody getting in trouble for that. But I'll be honest, we never had I don't remember a situation, well, just a handful of situations where there was like a non-dissemination order, but like I was on it because I was like, I couldn't talk about the case because it was my case. And so as far as anybody else on something like this, I would have assumed that you probably shouldn't be telling anybody or talking to anybody, including your family. To me, this sounds more like somebody seeing what has happened in other cases where conspiracy and a mob start to roll in, and they start coming up with these wild accusations and this wild stuff. And sometimes it runs over the evidence, and it runs over what the truth is. And so maybe perhaps somebody was trying to mitigate that and limit the amount of conspiracy that's out there. Because I mean, there's some people that even blame like family members, victim family members, and it's just disgusting. But you know, I can see a world where somebody might say, all right, hey, you know what, here's some pictures that he took and some searches. He searched BTK and Ted Bundy and all these other guys before all these other things happened. Because in the end, I'm not even sure how much of that stuff's going to be able to be used in court. You know, those selfies and things like that. Even his Ted Bundy searches, although I don't think were part of his curriculum. I think they brought up August 16th as one of the times that he was searching Ted Bundy. And at that time, school hadn't started. School hadn't started till August 22nd. So this wasn't for a class he was taking. And I looked up what classes he was teaching, and one of them was Criminal 101, and the other one is Criminal 320, which is something to do with like civil courtroom stuff. And none of it to do with, you know, why a psychopath does what he does or a serial killer does what they do. I mean, for one thing, that's more of the psychological aspect of criminology, not the criminal justice aspect of it. And so, to me, I don't see that correlation of his studies and what his searches were, but some can say, I guess, that he may have been writing something on Ted Bundy. I don't know. What do you think about that? The fact that he was searching Ted Bundy so much.
I always tease, if anybody looks at my search history, they are going to think I'm some crazed murderer. I mean, all day long, at various times throughout the day, I should say, and night, I'm always searching crime and motive and just all sorts of insidious things, probably like you, Daniel, too, because this is what we do. We need to be abreast of all the information, what's going on. We're trying to get our hands on everything. I can't tell you, I bet you I've Googled things about Ted Bundy probably 1,000 times. And I refer to him a lot in a lot of different cases, because I do feel like some of these different serial killers or potential serial killers that came after him emulate a lot of the techniques and things he used. And quite frankly, in my self-defense class, he is one of the people that we profile. We talk about what not to do to be a victim. And then I point out the different victim mistakes that were made in Bundy. But back to your question, I think because of that, Bryan Kohberger, the defense team, would have a heyday if they tried to bring that up. Although, in other words, I think the judge will say it's too prejudicial, and he would have to keep into account that this is a PhD student in criminology. If he would have been studying math, would have been more interesting, right? But I think they're going to be able to use all of that. Even though I agree with you, he wasn't teaching at the time, and what he was teaching was different. But it makes sense to me that somebody studying criminology would be Googling things like that.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And I highly doubt it's going to be let in either. But going back to the Dateline, Howard Bloom made an appearance quite a bit, and he made a ruckus a little bit with a motive theory that he had, coming back to Catherine Ramsland, Dr. Catherine Ramsland, former professor of Bryan Kohberger's. First and foremost, the theory that Bryan Kohberger may have, in some way, tried to either outsmart or get off on the fact that he could stump his former professor. What do you think about that?
So for me, first of all, I think Howard Bloom has done a good job in terms of researching. He's worked hard on this case. He definitely has put a lot of time into it. I mean, he's written a book, for heaven's sakes, right? And I respect anybody that is, trying to reveal truth in a true crime case. Having said that, I don't buy that theory at all. I do think that Bryan Kohberger was going like this if, again, he's responsible to everyone, saying, I am the smartest guy in the room. I can get away with this murder and what turned out to be murders. But do I think it was a specific to Catherine Ramsland or to prove anything to her? I think it was to prove anything, to prove he could do it to so many people, not just her, to everyone in, all his professors, anyone who's involved in true crime, to the
right.
police. That's what I think. Not it was specific to her.
Right. No, I don't think anything was specific to her. I think that when a lot of people look at the motive of this case, one of the things that kind of said, all right, maybe there's something there, is first and foremost, like BTK, Zodiac Killer. Those guys didn't commit their crimes to taunt the media and everybody else. They committed their crimes for other reasons. And part of reliving those crimes and getting off more on the crimes that they had committed was stumping people and doing those things. And so Bryan Kohberger, being a person who has been alleged to think he's the smartest person in the room, there's Dateline talks about him being very negative towards females, condescending, and having even described having like a hatred towards women. I wouldn't be I wouldn't think that if Bryan Kohberger committed this crime, that he would probably maybe get off on the fact that that his professor wouldn't figure it out. I mean, especially if he is this narcissistic, psychopathic, sociopath person who thinks he's smarter than everybody and nobody's going to figure this out, which is why BTK and everybody else, all those other serial killers did it. They weren't trying to get caught per se. They thought they were smarter than everybody and nobody was going to catch them. I can kind of see Bryan Kohberger doing something like that. And one of the reasons too is the fact that K-Bar knife was purchased in Pennsylvania. So was the balaclava mask. While he was in Pennsylvania, he was graduating with his master's degree. There wasn't any issues going on. He was getting referenced or referred to be in the PhD program. Only 2% of applicants at WSU that even get that recommendation get the position. And so all these things were going really, really good in his life at the time when he's purchasing these things. And so I find it not saying that the rejection and not saying that the problems he was having at WSU maybe didn't push him over the edge, but that's not what got him to do what he did, because he was at the height of his life when he was purchasing these items. What do you think?
I agree with you. And to expand on that, in my opinion, he had the seed to do this for years and years and years. It was really a buildup, accumulation of rejection, accumulation of really sort of loathing himself. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. And then that's reflected back, and he wants control back. He wants to be able to control all of those things that he could never have. And even before he was named as a subject, it was my belief, and I talked about it a lot, that this was an incel type person. This was a person that really hated women, and particularly women he felt he could never have, and rejected him and hurt him. And he was so deeply hurt. And this he talks about all of this in terms of his non-ability to have empathy. He wrote about this himself, and the fact he treated his father bad, and that he kind of felt bad about it, but he didn't really feel bad about it, but he recognized it. And just that he was really a terrible human. I mean, that's how he described himself, right, Daniel? So this was coming, no matter whether it was a good situation or bad. But I do think the breaking point was the job situation troubles at WSU.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that when it comes to a lot of the things that he's done in his life, overcoming his weight loss or overcoming his weight gain and being overweight, to possibly kicking his addiction. I don't know. There's some selfies he took. I think he looks high as a kite in those selfies, but that's just me. He overcome all these things, and to me, I think that he probably thought like, oh, you're gonna treat me this way. I've overcome this. He's gone through all this adversity and he's been able to overcome it. And I don't know him, and I don't know what he's gone through or whatever, but the writings that he's put out there, the things that he's alleged to have done, it seems to be pointing in one direction. The Dateline brought up the fact, and you bring up incel, the fact that there was a female PhD student who was attracted to him named Nayoung Ko, and she even spent the night with him. And I asked Howard Bloom this, and he told me that from what he has gathered, there was never anything romantic that went on there. Not to Nayoung Ko's, not because of her, but because of him. What do you think about that? That he did have somebody who was interested in him, who went to him when even if he's the one that created the problem to begin with, she still went to him and spent the night with him, and yet nothing happened.
She wasn't what he wanted. He wanted the star in the room. Nothing against this young woman, but this was not the, homecoming queen type, the one that goes into a party and is the life of the party, the beautiful blonde that everybody wants. At least that's what I think he pictured in his mind. And he was after the people who had rejected him. I think the one young woman we're referencing here was likely, kind of nerdy like him, and probably a good student, and a very nice person. But that wasn't what he desired. He desired, I believe, popularity, being the man, and being able to get, I'm just going to keep calling it that star in the room. He controlled a lot of stars.
Yeah.
On November 13th.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, he definitely did. Unfortunately. What do you think about, so according to the Dateline, and none of this has been proven, but it was alleged that Nyonko believed that there was a possibility that Bryan Kohberger was responsible for a break-in that had happened in her apartment, and that the reason behind it is because of a key that went missing out of their office that they shared. And then after she questioned him about it, it materialized later on that day. This was over a span of a few days. But during that break-in encounter, somebody moved a cake into the microwave and then put all the cosmetics lined up on the toilet seat. What does that tell you about the perpetrator for somebody to do those things?
Well, I personally believe it likely was him, because he had the opportunity. He knew it was safe ground in terms of not getting caught. So I think it is very likely that it was him. And I think, again, it's all about control. I can do this and get away with this if I can organize somebody's makeup, if I can go into the sanctity of somebody's home and burglarize. And who knows what else he did in there, by the way. Because these crimes, in my opinion, were completely, when it came to, I believe, and I've said this for 2 years approximately, that it was Maddy Mogen was the target. And he, I believe, would have sexually assaulted her in whatever way he had chosen, right? Different people, BTK never physically assaulted, but masturbated on his victims. Obviously, Ted Bundy did much more than that and was a philiac. And we know from the Dateline special that Bryan Kohberger looked at pornographic situations involving victims who were unconscious, drugged, not moving. So to me, this is the roadmap of what he wanted. In other words, what he would have wanted to have happen. But Kaylee was in the room, and I think all his plans and everything he hoped would happen didn't happen.
Yeah, I think you're pretty on point there with the target and what happened. I mean, obviously, I think that he may have even known who Xana was. If what Shadow Dragon put out is true, and he was following some of the victims and their friends and stuff like that. One of the things that I noticed was that damage or injuries to Kaylee and to Ethan were different than what they were to the other two persons in the room. And that told me that this person saw these other two folks, that Kaylee and Ethan, as people in the way of what he wanted to do or what he was trying to accomplish. But going back to the burglary of the apartment complex, to me, with somebody he knows, and it's more than just going in there and looking around, sneaking around and doing those things. He did something by putting the cosmetics on the toilet seat that is obvious and noticeable. I think he was getting off on the fear that he was incorporating into her. In him knowing her, he would have obviously have been aware of what had happened because they were friends or friendly. And so if somebody breaks into your home, you don't really know anybody. Kohberger knows that she doesn't know anybody. Obviously, she's going to go to him, and he's going to at least see something. He may not know all the details. He may not get all those things, but he's going to see the fear. And even if she doesn't go to him and say anything, he knows what occurred. And so he's going to notice little things maybe the next day if she didn't say anything to him while they're at work and stuff like that. So I think he was getting off on the fear he was putting on in that situation as well. Do you think that's a possibility?
Yeah, I think the number one get off, if you will, would have been the control. And to see the fear that what he did, to see that come out, which I agree with you. I think she probably confided. And if we're to believe everything they're saying, of course, they went hand in hand. So the control was the big ticket item. And then now he gets to see that fear come out. It's like individuals who sexually assault individuals, right?
Mm-hmm.
The what gets them off is controlling. But then when you scream and you have panic and fear, that is the coup de grace. So to your point, the action is sort of the most exciting, and then it's exacerbated when the person shows fear. So I agree with you.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to answer a few questions. I have a few questions coming up. Natalie says, could Hitler be playing up the Dateline issue more than he actually upset about it to be able to deny motions to continue to remove the DP? Is he thinking ahead of the defense? Do you think that anything he's doing is in efforts to not get the DP removed, in essence?
No, I think it's a great question, by the way, and a well thought out question and thought process. But I really believe from that hearing and from reading his own order and from the steps he's taking, I think he's incensed over this. I think he feels like one of his rulings is being, the finger has been given to it by someone or more than somebody, and he's mad about it. That's what I interpret. And I'll tell you, judges do not like people disregarding their orders.
Yeah. No, yeah, definitely. Natalie comes back to ask the prosecution how they will keep the gag order as a stretch. Too many involved to hold the prosecution accountable. I think Hitler's response to Dateline is more of what is ethically appealing to the defense. So, given how many members of law enforcement there was in this case, I mean, from FBI to state police to local police, assisting agencies, even in Pennsylvania, is it too much to hold the prosecution accountable for all of those individuals?
Well, this is the problem. This was a show on national television that hit the room of millions and millions and millions of individuals. Mm-hmm. And that is why he is particularly incensed, because it wasn't just a dissemination, it was a massive dissemination. And I think that's what's put him over the edge. I did want to say this, Danielle, and I wanted to get your reflection on this as well. It's the job of a reporter. It's the job of Dateline producers. It's their job to get information disseminated to the public that may not be well known, right? I mean, that's truly their job, to make an interesting program. And the really good producers and really good reporters, they all have amazing sources. It's unbelievable that they've cultivated and that they have this trust and an honor type relationship with. And I mean, they'll go to jail for protecting their sources. It happens often. So my question is, do you think that the journalists involved did something wrong in that? Isn't that their job? Isn't that considered a job well done, to be able to cultivate sources? I just think there are two separate issues here.
Yeah, no, I definitely see your point. It's like the job of a defense attorney who might represent somebody who otherwise a lot of people wouldn't would think wouldn't be deserving of some sort of defense. I mean, you can think of, we can take this case out of it, but, look into child predators and things of that nature. And people have to defend them like no other. And it's a job that they have to do regardless of anything else. And the same thing happens with media. It's a job that they have to do. They have to report it. There's a right there for that. The reason behind reporting the news is to make sure that the people are informed. And, I think that in this case, there was probably a lot or a few people who maybe were starting to fall into the conspiracy. And I think a lot of them fell out of that conspiracy when that Dateline premiered, and just how strong the evidence is. It's not even the evidence that they showed isn't even that strong. It's a couple of screenshots. Outside of the Amazon purchases and whatnot, it's not the solid evidence that we know that got him, that the prosecution's actually going to use. But in the end, is there something that they should have done, should not have done? Everybody has a right to know. The people have a right to know. Even the judge mentioned it in one of his hearings about transparency and that for the people to accept, what's going on, that they need to know and hear everything that's happened. I don't see. I know there's places that there aren't strict gag orders at, and they still find people either guilty or innocent, and some people have gotten acquitted. I think Casey Anthony, I think she was in Florida, right? And in that case, there was like everything. There was not much hidden, and yet she still was able to get off on her case. So in the end, I think that I don't think that it is the responsibility of the media to police the police. If somebody wants to tell them something, it's fair game.
Yeah, I just have to agree with that. I think I agree with that. I also wanted to just plot twist. Ready? Yeah. What if the defense disseminated it in the hopes that the prosecution or law enforcement would be blamed, that they'd get a continuance, and essentially to put the prosecution in the situation they're in right now, which is in big trouble with Hitler. Just a fun little plot twist that crossed my mind.
I think that it's a very dangerous thing to do. For one, I think that if the defense did something like that, put out information that would hurt their client, I think they could lose their license. They could be, or I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know how any of that works. But if they purposefully let out information that went against their client, I think that would be bad. I think that would be really, really bad. And I think they, I understand the tactic behind it. Eventually the only thing I could think of is maybe, this information, but why put out information that's, because I was gonna say, why put out information that's not going to come out in trial? But then that's the exact reason why you would put out that information, because it's not going to come out in trial. So, it'd be interesting. But if they got caught doing something like that, I think they could lose their license and not practice. And so, as much as I think that they're willing to put their reputation on the line, so to speak, I'm not entirely certain they'll put their license on the line, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no. And again, just kind of thought, right? Yeah. It's a little fodder right there, but whoever did this, if it was the prosecution team, anybody on that team, they're going to lose everything too. They're going to have a serious bar situation if this was anyone on the attorney side of things. So they're risking a lot. If it's law enforcement, they're probably only risking, and this isn't only, but they're risking their job, their reputation, their ability to earn money. Whoever did this risked a lot.
I agree. They put a lot on the line to to come out here and say the information that they did. Maybe perhaps they didn't think it would go this far. Maybe they thought because a lot of the information is, I don't know. I couldn't begin to explain the thought process behind. All right, let me let out the selfies, the searches, the fact that he was looking for a K-bar knife so recently after the murders, the fact that he was by the house 23 occasions, which was in the documents. I mean, some of this stuff was in the documents. Even suspect vehicle 1, although the video wasn't there, but there's been screen images that have gone on and around. I didn't hear any issues with the 911 call being released, but they had a transcript that they released on it. So maybe perhaps that was the train of thought. And some of this is like, hey, they released some selfies. They've already released the 911 call. They've released some still images of the video. Maybe we can release a little bit more. Maybe that's their train of thought. I don't know.
Well, I like your train of thought. If it was law enforcement, I would like to think that their motivation was good in a sense. In other words, that they were tired of all the misinformation going on and blaming Dylan Mortenson and all these other individuals that there was no proof. And they said, let's try to get this out here. Let's get a few nuggets out. Dateline is well respected, very well trusted, huge audience. And, having worked with them, the producers on that show and the reporter, Keith, it doesn't get much better than that in terms of professional staff. In other words, where you would know you would be protected.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any way anybody from Dateline is ever giving up who their source is. They'll go to jail first. I mean, that's what I think. That's why they're trying to get it from this angle. We'll see if it goes any further from the journalism angle. I'm going to be watching that closely. Yeah.
Yeah. Karen says, in addition to Dateline, could the new info on the cell tower accuracy also cause a delay? So I had on Andrew Garrett, who is from Garrett Discoveries. He has a program called Shadow Dragon. They put in Bryan Kohberger's email address. Well, they ran a background check on Bryan Kohberger, and they got his email address from that, and they were able to put into that email address into their Shadow Dragon program and find a connection. But he also was contacted by the defense team early on in this investigation, before the defense team made contact with Cy Ray to talk about their points and data points and things like that and their cell tower stuff. I'll say this, that I don't know if you've caught that interview. He talked about how inaccurate some of the cell tower pings can be. But like I told him, that interview is now with the prosecution, and he's offered to help the prosecution, whatever that means or however that works. I hope he can help them figure out the cell stuff. But I don't know. Did you catch that interview by any chance?
Only part of it. I didn't get to see the whole thing. But very impressive. Glad that you got that interview in. I think that anytime, especially on these cases, that we can look at the different items that bring more clarity to the facts, right? To the evidence that we know in the public view, that they're just such important interviews.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing is that I thought of more than anything, and is that, all right, Andrew Garrett, he was very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? He was tough on law enforcement and Cy Ray and their cell tower accuracies. And so he basically laid out the blueprint of what the defense should say or do. I'm just glad that the prosecution now has that blueprint, so they are prepared as well. You know what I'm saying? So Shannon comes in asking, Papa Roger mentioned the sheath before Ellie did. Need that connection. I asked him about Papa Rogers because of the Shadow Dragon and stuff, and he said that he couldn't tell. He didn't know if Bryan Kohberger was Papa Rogers or not. One thing I did notice, though, is all of Papa Rogers' communication were late or early evening. Didn't sound like Bryan Kohberger. Bryan Kohberger was online doing a bunch of searches throughout the middle of the night. I find it odd that there wasn't very many, if not any, Papa Rogers communications or posts after like 11 o'clock at night. What is that? Do you see what I'm saying there?
Well, I think the biggest issue with Papa Roger is, and I really dove into that a lot because I've always been fascinated by people like BTK. Again, you know, I grew up about 5 miles from BTK, and people were getting attacked exactly when I was growing up there. So when you grow up down the road, probably 5 minutes away, 10 minutes away at most, from a serial killer that's actively serial killing when you're growing up, it's pretty interesting because everybody knew who BTK was. I mean, he was disseminating information in the Wichita Eagle and Beacon. He was on Cake TV. I mean, all of us knew about it, and all of us were concerned. And the only reason I say that is because I thought, wow, if this is truly him, Daniel, this is the modern age of, instead of disseminating your tantalizing clues and everything and saying ha ha ha, this is me in a cloak by a letter, or calling or sending a letter to a news station. I mean, he's doing it online. I just thought that was so interesting. But I think the problem is after there, I think, were 2 communications that at least a lot of people that are sleuths came out and said, oh, look, it's the same IP and this and that. I think only law enforcement really knows. And I think we're going to know at some point.
Yeah, I think we are too. Well, Jen, I know we're getting a little bit late. I know you had a hard stop and we may have gone past that just by a few minutes. But I want to thank you so much for coming on. I know we have about 3,300 people, over 3,300 people watching right now. Please like, comment, subscribe. Go over to Jennifer's channel as well. Like and subscribe there. I have it linked in the comment section. Also, her Twitter as well. So you guys can follow her tweets. Puts out a lot of information. You get up-to-date news on a lot of true crime stuff. So make sure you go and follow her on X and on YouTube. Is there anything else you want to say before we call it a show?
Hey, I just wanted to really thank you. You know, I feel like you're doing the Jedi mind trick on me because this was a show that I wanted to do, and I wanted to do with you, talking about the Dateline, talking about Bryan Kohberger. I hope we continue these discussions. I know you and I have had some backdoor discussions on maybe a project or two. So anyway, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. And yeah, you guys keep an eye on. We're definitely going to be working more and more to go together, myself and Jennifer. And you guys like, comment, subscribe. Make sure we go and follow. I want to thank everybody that's been here tonight. You guys stay safe. I'll be back probably on Thursday. You guys have a great night. Peace.